That's just okay. Recorded. That's great. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a true honor to be here in real effort from a pool of universities. And I would like to say thank you to my colleagues Ingo Salet and Marco Felix Jobim from PUC in Rio Grande do Sul, but also to other colleagues just like Luiz Delori from Mackenzie, Andrea Caraciola, also from Mackenzie, Fernando Gajardoni from USP de Ribeirão Preto, Jordão Violim de PUC do Paraná, Tiago Rodovalho da PUC de Campinas, Fernanda Tartucci do CEAPRO e Marcos Sabino do IBMEC. It's, as I said, a true honor to have here Professor Joshua Walker, but the main introduction as a presenting for everybody who what is absolutely not an necessary effort, but I guess this is a respectful effort that we are going to work on, is a task for Anthony Silva, who is a student from Mackenzie, and who I thank in the name of everybody who's organizing this event. And I'd like to ask Anthony to introduce our guest, Professor Joshua Walker. Anthony, please.
Thank you, Professor Luis. Good night, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you. And firstly, thank you so much, Professor Joshua, for making time. It is not hard for me to introduce Professor Joshua. He's a kind soul. He loves Brazil. He loves helping people in need. And well, I'm in love with legal design, and I'm in love with returning law to people and making it all about people. And Joshua is one of those people that are not only working in the academy or working for himself, but he's truly working towards a better world and making ways for using AI to improve the quality of life of people. And this is remarkable because not everyone has this sense. And as he told us, he came to Brazil, and I believe he and Tammy, his wife, would like to come here whenever they could, because they're in love with our country, and I had the honor of meeting them in person. And just speaking a bit about him, Professor Joshua is the author of On Legal AI. It is perhaps the first systematic and practical treatment of law and artificial intelligence. This book was published in English and also in Portuguese by Editora Thomson Reuters Brazil. He has developed a career as an IP attorney. He worked for many years with Aon, and now he has his own practice. He's the co-founder of the Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. It is the first computer science and law laboratory in the United States. And he was also the executive director at Stanford IP Litigation Clearinghouse, that later on began to be named Lex Machina. He was the founding CEO and chief legal architect of Lex Machina. It is a leading litigation AI tool, heavily used by the bar, the global industry, the White House, the US judiciary, and many governments worldwide. And he worked in many leading Silicon Valley IP transactions for a major law firm. He was a general counsel and project executive for Airbus Advanced Project Group. He says here, flying car lawyer, and he writes regularly on AI, IP, and policy. And speaking a bit about the nonprofit work, he was part of a UN mission for the International Criminal Court at Rwanda after the genocide. He helped to develop solutions in there. So I believe that this passion for humankind has roots since the past. And once again, Professor Joshua, thank you for making time for meeting with us, because I know your schedule is really busy. Thank you to CEAPRO, IBMEC, Mackenzie, PUC Rio Grande do Sul. Sorry if I missed anyone, but thank you all. And Professor Joshua, I would like to let you know that here in this meeting, we have we have some of the most brilliant minds on civil litigation in Brazil. So I'm speaking to a selected audience. I'm really honored to be here with you all because they are professors I read from and I learn from. So this is about to be a remarkable event. Thank you, everyone. Please, Professor Joshua.
Obrigado. Thank you so much again, and it's an honor to be here. Without boring people too much, I might tell a story or two about some things that have happened in the US that have been useful, and some failures as well. And I think it's really important to talk about the failures that we've had, as well as the successes. Brazil, Anthony knows he's sick of hearing me talk about the potential for Brazil to lead the world and law and innovation and AI. But there are certain factors that you really need to consider as an opportunity. And the first is digital access, right? The fact that there are both federal and state systems that have widespread access. I'm sure things are not perfect, but the ability to get access to case information from all over Brazil, as well as from both constitutional courts, is very unusual. What's also really unusual, and I know the Chief Justice, who's still the Chief Justice, when we were working on things early on in 2006 and 2008, he was very excited to get access to data about the caseload, right? And what was happening in those cases and which judges are doing what. But I never had a Chief Justice reach out and through his Associate Justice and say, hey, we'd like to really research this and dig into how we can use AI to pursue law. And I don't think that's a partisan thing. So Justice Fuchs, in the stuff that he's written and come out with in the last month, I don't think this is just one party or another. Whatever happens in October in Brazil, I think there is a deep vein of interest in these areas for a simple reason. And that reason is pendency. When I asked some of colleagues in Rio why they were interested in it, and they said, we're staring at the abyss. Right, the pendency level is so high, and I'm gonna get the number of pendent cases in Brazil wrong, but it's enormous, of course, and the cost of filing is relatively low, right, which is a great thing, but for the judges, to them, it's a terrifying thing. The need is very high, and so in a lot of ways, that's an opportunity. So it's here. I'll in the next few minutes, I'll talk about a use case. But first, before getting to that, as we're speaking, right, and as we're speaking right now, there's an enormous controversy happening in the US, both nationally with something the American Bar Association came out with, and then in California in particular, which is supposed to be this, laboratory for developing new policy initiatives, and it's supposed to be very dynamic. Not so much right now in this way. So what's happening right now is the American Bar Association has issued something that says they're against any experimentation with law firm ownership. They're against researching anything relating to looking at law firm ownership. Right now, there's 2 states in the United States that are looking at capital and whether they're having experiments where you can closely supervised by the bar associations and the Supreme Courts in those states. They're looking at experiments where you could have a non-lawyer owned legal activity. And they're defining it and reviewing it carefully. Now, those experiments may turn out successful or not, but they're engaged in analyzing whether something will support the market in those states that is not a traditional law firm. Again, I love traditional law firms. I love the practice of law. I'm an old school lawyer. I don't necessarily care about technology per se as a thing. I'm not excited by that. I'm excited about, how do you help people more efficiently, get more done, and still preserve the art of the law. But we have to look at this. And the reason we have to look at fundamental things in the way the law is actually regulated and the way the profession is regulated, and what the profession does is the estimate in California, which is a pretty large state, and economically it's I'm not sure, maybe I want to say $40 billion a year, 40 trillion. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's an enormous part of the US economy and the global economy. but the amount of law that is actually done compared to what is needed is a tiny fraction, right? And even though we might have, maybe 200,000 lawyers in California, which is a significant number, and I think more than anywhere except perhaps New York, we're serving about 2% of the community. And that's across the board. It's the poor, most of all, who are most exposed. There's some legal services there. And it's the rich. No one, and it's even enterprise that don't want to use lawyers because we're so expensive. And I love what we do, and I love great legal work, but it takes time and it takes energy, and it's hard to get people that are trained as well as the people on this Zoom conference. So it's incredibly expensive. Computers are still not that smart, as most AI people will admit, but they're cheap and they're fast. And the reason we're having this conversation ultimately is about human need, but it's also, and because of that, it's about the economies of scale of software. What do I mean by that? When you make a piece of software that does some kind of something in relation to the law or anything else, marketing data, technology, housing analysis, medical statistics, it's very, very hard to build that system, a system that is good, that connects with humans well, that does the math correctly, that does it at scale quickly. But once you built it, once you put in that fixed cost, as many of the economists on this call know, once you've done that, the marginal cost is extremely low. It approaches zero asymptotically over time. So if you can write a piece of software that does even something very, very basic, like helps you get your citizenship identity card, right? Which is certainly has been a huge issue from Sao Paulo's perspective, as well as nationally from Brasilia's perspective, and particularly if you're in Amazonia, right? It's an enormous issue just doing these, again, citizenship identification card stuff is a huge issue. You can create an AI that helps someone do that in their particular case. It could have an enormous benefit, and it could help end people like that, whether they're in Amazonia or Minas Gerais, and pardon my pronunciation, I'm sure it's terrible, but please forgive me. You can do that for 200 million Brazilians, and the AI can be quite similar. That is why we're having this conversation. It's not because AI is better or smarter or whatever. It's just because it's cheaper. And if you build it, even for the wealthy, you can use it for everyone. And that's foundationally different from the way governments work. And it opens the door to do all kinds of other things. From the judge's perspective, it's going to help them do the analysis and help them cluster cases. If it's the constitutional court, it's going to help them identify bias, right, in the way that courts work. And even things like, if there's a problem with particular judges, it can identify those types of things. There's projects I think in Sao Paulo and elsewhere that are looking at sexism, for instance, in judicial commentary, not based on what's happening in the facts of the case, but based on the judge's own, his or her own comments. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And I'll give you a use case that was successful in the US a while back and where it's failed. Right now, there is, I think, enormous fear in the California bar and the New York bar and others, New Jersey bar associations, which are some of the largest. There's enormous fear that AI is going to take over people's jobs, and an even bigger fear that Deloitte and the big four accounting firms are going to take over the law. And there's some reality. If you're in Europe, the accounting firms are a huge force, right? They're very, and they're very dynamic. They buy companies, even though they're partnerships, they move in some ways very quickly and dynamically. So there is a legitimate fear that the bar and the law is going to get taken over by these accounting firms, and or by technology companies that Google will take over it. Again, I don't think that's a real fear for reasons I can go into. But the bottom line, and so to protect themselves, certain lawyer lobbying groups have been attacking even research, even academic style research on, hey, should we re-examine how capital gets to law firms? They're saying, don't even look into this. This is bad. It's radioactive. Stay away from it. And we're active right now. There's a fight happening today and actively involved, saying we have to examine this. because people are suffering. The rich are suffering, the poor are suffering, people from every ethnic group. There is no access to justice in the United States. I've had access to justice maybe very briefly in my life, and I've been relatively fortunate. So for most people, access to what they actually need to live a full life and fulfill their legal needs, be self-actualized in terms of the law, like understand what they're doing when they get married and enter into a lease and sign a contract with a big tech company. People have no idea. And so because of the protectionism, it's really distorting and causing an enormous amount of suffering. And that, let's be clear, it leads to death. If your Social Security's benefits take 10 years to get to you, and there's no mechanism for that to be, transacted in a fair and just way and in a reasonable way, you could die if your health access is misallocated. You could die if you lose your job because there's not enough economic activity, and you live, whether in the U.S. or like say India in particular, where they may or may not have robust access to healthcare outside of employment, you could die. So it is a life and death issue for people, and it's certainly a quality of life issue for absolutely everyone. The market isn't being met. We need software to automate some of these things. About a little over 10 years, I would say 14 years ago, it really began. We had a situation where intellectual property cases were viewed as being a huge problem for tech and other people, tech companies, as well as entrepreneurs and things like that. There was a lot of software litigation, and the sense was that not a lot of it was meritorious. People would file a lawsuit, and if it costs $5 million or $10 million to defend, you would pay them money, even if it was a terrible case that was going to fail. So that's not really an ideal situation. If anyone can file a lawsuit against you and you can't get out of it without defending it for $10 million. So, and again, there's a lot of meritorious cases there too. I'm not saying they're not, but there was a question about it. And so a bunch of big companies, foundations, and Kauffman Foundation and law firms got together and they raised capital for a university. And what they did, they had to find a crazy person to run and make this project happen, and that happened to be me, fortunately, I guess. But and through many, many miracles, this project was able to succeed, and a lot of great people and computer scientists as well, and supported the judiciary and the bar and enterprise, as well as governments all over. And essentially, we used AI to look at the docket and identify and extract information from this. Here's what was going on. Here's what was happening. And they had a human, particularly me, who had to sit in the basement of a law school and review every single case, if it was a trial or an appeal or a summary judgment or some complicated element. That system, we started with patent, and the algorithms scaled to basically every other type of lawsuit class in federal court in the US. It started with patent. What we found, and then the Comptroller General of the United States, sort of the auditor of the US, it's a nonpartisan group called the GAO, General Accountability Office. They said, as part of a new enactment that President Obama did, they said, we want to look at this like patent troll problem. And we got the commission, and we had to fight for it, right? It was always a fight. And what the data we gave them, what they found is there's no such thing as these patent trolls, these bad people that file lawsuits, right? There's a spectrum of different people that are plaintiffs, and it's complete. It is not binary. It is completely analog, right? It is like, you can't say good and bad. It's just a range of people that are monetizing and filing these things for different reasons. But what they did find is that software patents, the good patents that get litigated, they get invalidated by the federal courts 95% of the time. Semiconductor patents have 30% of them have something go wrong in one of the patents over time. So fairly low rate, people understand the technology. Software was 95%. So it was like we had a factory that was producing things that were 95% bad. Right? You you can imagine a car, and I'm not comparing justice to car manufacturing or, cuckoo clocks or anything like that. But we had a factory that was producing 95% wrong stuff. And eventually, not because of us, but because the data became available, you said, hey, something needs to happen. The bar was increased to get a software patent. Probably too high, right? Actually, they probably overdid it, but it is easier to operate doing any kind of software in the US now because of that. There's less tax from bad patents, right? So anyway, that's an example of something that was successful. Most of the time when you hear law and AI, it's either innovation theater, or it's just software that is not AI at all, but there's something happening, or it's people that are it's the symbol of it without the reality. And I think first and foremost, something that is happening now in Brazil for sure, at which quality no one knows, and the judges say more could be done, and the entrepreneurs say we've got 5 companies that are going to be that are already doing this and everything's done. So you have to judge, but there's an enormous amount happening. And it starts with what I would call schematizing the federal rules of civil procedure or state rules of civil procedure for individual states. Taking the rules, right? And I've got my stack of procedural code on the wall, right? Everything begins with that. All litigation analysis begins with the schema of the material events and the material procedures within that. And what the AI can do very legitimately is determine through a lot of human kludging and through a lot of people asking people like you, hey, is this an X event or a Y event? In other words, is this a motion for summary judgment or a motion to dismiss, or both? And you've got to decompose the document because it's a mess, right? Or naturally it's supposed to be a mess because the judge wanted it this way. How do you extract out all the material and the documents for all 80 million cases that are pending, or the 200 million that you want to look at for the last 20 years in Brazil? Of those 200 million, how many events of this type or this type occurred? What were the outcomes? Who won and who lost, to the extent there was a winner or a loser? And what is beyond and once you've reviewed enough of them, you have the computer take over and automate extraction of the simple things. So you think of it as it's a mining operation, and you're doing extraction and analysis, and you're doing some radar scanning. All of that is very much real and very much possible. Whether it's good or bad, like every single AI is like a child, and the mother is the data, and the father is the mathematics, right? And to put it very as one of my colleagues did, and if you can use this to sort out what happened and provide that information to judges and to others who are litigants, you avoid a lot of cases, first of all, and second, your efficiency dramatically increases. And I'll give you an example. There's a very well-known judge in Northern District of California. I won't say what his name is. He hates patent cases and he loves criminal cases, and he just issued a big ruling just now on something very interesting. And he hates patent cases, and he loved the tool because every time someone wanted to define a 2 nanometer semiconductor, electron translation engine lithography machine, he had no technical background per se, great writer and very well qualified, but didn't have any background. He could see how every other judge in the country has ever interpreted something like that. And he's not going to take her interpretation or his interpretation or anything, but it's kind of a finder's scope. Oh, here's how people do this, and here's how we can do it. So it helps judges do their jobs. It helps the chief judge figure out what's going on. Another judge, Judge Alsup, and this I can talk about, he did get your commission to study, and he said, I want to know, after the Markman hearing, a patent hearing where you interpret the words in the patent, after a Markman hearing, what's the settlement rate? And we found there was a correlation. If this event happens, settlement goes way up. So don't wait till the end of the trial, till there's to do this event. Move it right up front so that essentially the likelihood that people can resolve the case quickly without use of enormous judicial resources goes up. The academics can look at this, and we can look at it and spend enormous amounts of time in recommending things. And every single branch, judiciary, legislature, and executive branch, can use it to help guide policy. That, to me, is revolutionary. And it's not complicated. It requires people like you to understand, hey, there is complexity, but it's understanding, hey, this is this type of event and that is that. And every AI is like a child, because your inputs to that, how you're teaching the AI, what types of events or what correlate to what types of text, is all unique, like a fingerprint. But the use of it, the use of that data, once that's done, is actually quite simple. 95% of these are bad cases. What's going on? Let's try to adjust the statute to improve this. That, it's almost like engineering, for nation states. And that, to me, is revolutionary. Lawyers in the US, I would say, I'm guessing 90% of patent litigators in the US use something, or they have their co-counsel is using something that it allows them to see what's going on and who wins what, and what judge like which arguments. And if this judge, if she only likes this doctrine for summary judgment, don't file 20 doctrines of this other type, file this one, unless you want to waste the client's money. And if there's something, if there's a judge in the US that has 99, I think there was one judge in the US that had, I want to say 60 or 70% of the caseloads for the entire US of this one type of for patent claims. It was an enormous number, concentrations. Like, that seems off. Like what's going on? So if you're Justice Roberts in the US or Justice Fuchs or his successor in Brazil, you want to know what's happening. And so that's very essential for democracy. Things and anomalies and all kinds of bad things thrive in the dark. So giving sunlight to these things are important. The failure in California and the failure nationally right now, or the potential failure in both these areas, means that people that need help, either going to court or not going to court or making their legal lives better, is not getting done. They can't do a Google search for law. They don't have that aid that the AI is actually capable of doing with great lawyers working with it. And that is a tragedy, and it's killing people. And it will continue to do that until we actually learn how to fuse great law with the scale of software. Anyway, those are my remarks. I could talk about any issue, Professor or Anthony Silva, but again, happy talking. I'd love if people had questions, or if there are things in particular we could dive in on. I'd love to talk about Brazil as well as just the US. Professor Delord, do you want me to, again, happy to keep going and happy to dive in some questions about realities, whether from the academy, law firms, or from others, or in Brazil or here.
Professor Walker, thank you for this, let's say, first part. Lots of things going on. Of course, we are with our minds blowing with lots of information. Let me say, it is interesting for you to say about this access of justice in the US comparing to Brazil. Because now we are saying down here, oh, maybe we have too much access to justice. And some people here say, no, we need more. So in this point, at this first moment, I would like to ask, you know something about Brazil, of course, but in this point, do you think that access to justice in the US could be better with AI, right? That would be the first point. But for instance, do you think in Brazil, considering our reality down here, would it also be a better way so that we could provide all around the country access to justice? in which sense we could say that AI can help? Only regarding it would be easier, faster, and cheaper, or way beyond that when we consider the whole thing about predictable and things like that? I don't know if you got my point.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And I'll start answering, then please cut me off if I'm going down the wrong path. We had a concept that we've talked about before in Sao Paulo and elsewhere, called citizens AI. And the idea is that if you can build something that helps a citizen manage her or his, kind of daily legal universe, that would be a huge benefit. Even if it's just pointing them to directions of, hey, these are legal resources and here are some forms and here are government websites that describe exactly what you need to deal with, right? And it could be vaccine requirements to, identity papers to any procedure, right? Healthcare, whatever it is. We all have things like that, but there's no advocate that an individual can trust that has legal privilege or something like that, whatever the equivalent is in Brazil and elsewhere. So having an AI that any citizen can use that helps them maintain their legal life, I think would be a huge improvement. We don't have that in the US. So even like forms management would be a real benefit, and you could categorize, hey, and you could nudge people, right? One of my professors is a guy named Cass Sunstein, and I'm pretty sure that he's the guy that nominated Daniel Kahneman to get the Nobel Prize. So I won't say how I know that, but I'm pretty sure. And he taught us behavioral economics, and he has a book called Nudge. And Nudge is just, how do you adjust things so that, it's not requiring people, it's not using force or legal force. It's just nudging people to do very positive things. So retirement plans, 401k savings in the US, but any retirement or pension contribution, if you make the default to, essentially to contribute the maximum per month, 90% of the people just do that. They leave it at the default. If it's zero, 90% of people leave it at zero. So what's better for them from a very narrowly, positive perspective for the individual? Probably contribute, right? From a tax and from a long-term benefit perspective, having surprise money later in life when you need it is a good thing. So there's many areas like that. I'm a religious person, so I have many religious requirements around organ donation. But organ donation is another area where if people set it as, I agree to, or a default, I agree to default to give my organs to another if I'm in a motorcycle crash or something. Again, the participation rate goes up to 90%. And so if you think there are pure social goods in the world, like contributing to pension funds and things like that, using systems that benefit the individual are good. All we're saying is give a little more legal intelligence to those nudging systems, and we could, or if someone's trying to do an activity, they're getting divorced, right? It's an abusive relationship where they must get, or something else is happening where they actually need to carry out a legal procedure. Make it easier for them, right? Don't create a wall of thorns that people are stumbling into. I was on a subcommittee for the California Bar called the Task Force on Access to Justice through Technology, right? ATAPS. I still don't know what access to justice means because I'm not sure I've ever had it myself for any long period of time. And again, what does it mean? I don't think an AI is going to give anyone justice, but we can actually look at systems where there's real anomalies, like the patent case, right? Where something was wrong with the system. And again, it's not that anyone was committing fraud, it's that the system, the statutory grant system was off. It had to be adjusted. We were doing something very, very complicated. Same with allocating medical, medical benefits. Very, very complicated, and there's trade-offs between different humans that does not get easier over time. And so if you're doing anything like that, having data is really important. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Aquelas outras duas lá do 10º não.
Sorry, Mr.
We
Go
were
ahead.
interrupted. It was some outside audio. Sorry for that.
Oh, okay. No problem. Thank you. I think we need to unlock the marketplace for software to help human need, and we have to regulate it really carefully. I don't want, as much as I respect the accounting profession, I don't want them running the legal profession. And the reason for that is I'm old enough to remember a small company called Enron, where basically the CFO and the CEO and their outside accounting firm found a way to, using risk analytics, defraud essentially the company, and they essentially blew the company up. And the law firm that they had its arms twisted to doing things that they shouldn't have approved. And you see this all the time. You see this with mine inspections, you see it with audits, you see this with all this stuff. As much as we are a flawed profession, there's a lot of great things about the law. We read a lot of history, we understand it, we have an ethical code. I think most people don't keep up with it. And after they've passed that ethical exam, I don't think many people really embody that. And that's why institutions like yours, and including all the people in this group, having a mission in the institution is the only thing that's going to save us. It's not going to be the pure ethics rules that people will, check the box and then go do terrible things, right, to make money, but, to cause controversy, right? Lawyers fighting each other so much that they increase the legal fees. This is a classic problem in the US. Discovery, the cost of litigation being so high that a plaintiff with a fraudulent or bad claim that should never have been brought gets paid off and has a business out of this because the cost of the lawsuit is so high. That's an anomaly that's just wrong, right? We have to find ways of making these things more efficient, because whether it's pendency, like MLK said, justice too long delayed is justice denied, or whether it's, hey, there's something weird in the way we've crafted this claim, or the procedures we've invented are actually increasing litigation as opposed to reducing it, right? So how can we use arbitration and mediation better? How do we embed them in the contracts as well as in the judicial procedures so that the system is, I don't want to say more efficient, because it's not, we're not stamping out cars and we're not making tin cans, it is justice, but we also have to use quantitative analysis to have justice at all. Otherwise, there won't be justice, right? If you don't do that quantitative analysis and thinking about these things and looking at the phenomenology of lawsuits and litigation and procedure, you lose the point of it, either because the system gets overwhelmed or we're missing like a heat spike in an area that needs to be modified or changed. A lot of times lawyers will have an instinct that, hey, something is wrong here, but to prove it, they need data. And that's why we need this kind of data science element. Professor Delora, I don't know if I answered any of your questions. So I think both sides, both the national infrastructure, we desperately need that. And it's low controversy because those are technologies that can go to lawyers and judges and executive branch officials. They can be the users of it. And you can even build it in Brasilia if you want, or in some of the very large, especially in some of the larger states. They're essentially as big as nation states to some extent. And they have very creative people of all types and a lot of interdisciplinary stuff. Unlike Argentina, right, where there is the number of AI people in Argentina is incredibly low. Brazil also has the computer science universe in Brazil is very, very robust. Even the computer science community in the United States that is Brazilian is robust. So for sure, it's robust in a lot of the university centers. So there's opportunity for the national infrastructure piece, but I'm really interested in the citizen piece because nobody's doing that yet. And to do that at some scale, you need regulatory clearance and safe harbor to say, you can create an application that can help someone file a divorce petition and manage it. So even if it's imperfect, it's better than them representing themselves, which is a lot of what happens in the US. Anyway, I don't know if I answered any of that question, but happy to keep going or move on.
That was great. That was great. I appreciate that. As I said, lots of things going on our minds. I'm sure. For now, would someone like to ask a question, or can we go ahead? I have another question, but I don't want to be just me to the guy who asks.
I have a question too. I'd like to ask you, Professor Walker, about something that bothers me. That is the cause for equal access to justice. In Brazil, we have a crisis of inequality, a huge crisis of inequality. And I was thinking about the use of AI for lawyers, not for judges, but for lawyers. Today is Lawyers' Day in Brazil. And I was thinking about something that bothers me, that is that some law firms have access to powerful tools based on AI, and other lawyers that won't work on this big tech and big law firms won't have this kind of tools, let's say. And the problem for me is that as I understood, if I understood it right, the case for AI should be in terms of justice, in some way worked from the state to the people, as I understood. Because if we let this kind of tools only for private innovators to work on, maybe some kind of these tools won't reach the poor lawyers or the lawyers that are still only starting to work on the young ones, for example. I'd like to hear you about that. I don't know if I made my point also, but
yes,
I guess this is a huge question for me. Thank you.
Obrigado. And it's very complicated. It goes, both of those things happen. But both what you talked about and the opposite actually happen. I'll start with two stories. In one case, we had a client who was a boutique intellectual property law firm, a specialist law firm, super, very wealthy clients, but a small group. And they said, when we released this tool, they said, our market advantage has gone down because all of the unique little things we know now anyone can get access to, and it's a flat rate. So there's an enormously democratizing element to this, whoever you are, and local knowledge, like local, I'm the local owner of this market because I know this judge. If an outside lawyer can see everything this judge did, she's much better positioned to compete with that other person because the knowledge was relatively locked in. So there is a democratizing factor. On the other hand, there's a real failure because very often the things that are most important are least well funded. And when we were doing this IP case, the judge, there was a huge fight. A lot of the judges did not want us to get their data for two reasons. One is the judiciary in the US is at odds with Congress. The funding is all controlled by Congress, but Congress doesn't always love the judiciary. A lot of people are not looking to fund judges because they're the ones that knock out their laws. And, there's a lot of incredibly complicated politics about judicial budgets. So most of the money for clerks in the US, who are the ones that really make the system run to some extent, it comes from photocopying fees for digital documents. So if you want a copy of a docket or a document in the federal system, and there is a federal system, we have one that's not as expansive as Brazil's by far, but there is one and it does seem to work, and it's all of the districts use it to some extent. You have to pay for it, and it's 10 cents a page or 12 cents a page now. So they make about, I think, $1 billion a year, and that pays for judicial clerks. It pays for a lot of their budget that should have been paid for through Congress. It just doesn't, because I know our democracy seems perfect, but obviously it's not, right? I'm speaking ironically. So this crazy thing happens where, unlike the United Kingdom, the courts want to have their data. And they thought, hey, if we made everything public, they wouldn't be able to sell as many documents to people. So therefore, cut off these Stanford people. Don't let them have the documents, right? They told me to like ask judges for free access, and then they attacked the idea because they were worried about losing budget. And I don't want them to lose their budget. I want them to have clerks. I want a functioning judiciary, but it's a weird way to fund it though. It's almost like having car wash. It's almost like having, some kind of a bake sale to help your local judge, but it's weird. So, and we had one judge in Northern California who was kind of a hero, and he said, no, we should fund this, we should give our data to these people, and here's why. And we got access not just to the civil documents, but to the non-confidential criminal documents and habeas corpus, which is the criminal prisoners, rights of the prisoner, rights of the body, rights of the prisoners in US federal prison. So if someone was going to get killed by a rival gang, in 48 hours, or if someone needed healthcare that they weren't getting and they had a right of access to, they could die, or if their religion was being suppressed illegally or in any way, that was a legitimate position. But there's tens of thousands of petitions that any judge and clerk has to go through. So we could have done something that helped the clerks sort through those and go from, what may have been not as meritorious petitions to like, hey, this is life and death. This looks legit. And here are signals in the data that says we have to review this quickly. Even if that system was imperfect, it could have saved lives. We didn't have the mandate to build that system. So I think the problem with pure commercial approaches to this is that you need the things that are most important are the least funded. The first job I did on this was in Rwanda. We were building a database for the UN. We had no money, access. We had zero. My mother was sending me, legal pads from Canada, and Canadian as well as American. We had nothing, but it was incredibly important to get the perpetrators of this genocide and make sure we knew who were the actual perpetrators and not go after false leads. So you need mission-driven institutions that are in the middle, and they are doing pro bono projects, not just commercial startups, right? And the environments, the entrepreneurial tech environments in Brazil are incredible, right? And the Brex people, those two entrepreneurs, they're down the street from me in Southern California now. Like there is an incredible entrepreneurial committee. So you know that something will happen if there is a rich client that's going to help fund it. You want to do that. And what I recommend is, hey, let them do all their stuff, but get a percentage of that. If you're going to let law firms go public in the US, take 2% and use that to fund public interest projects. So everybody wins. Now, there's a lot of critique on that from the California Supreme Court and others, but there's an opportunity to go after win-wins. You must have the pro bono things as well. You must have the mission, and the universities, research institutions have to be at the center, because if you're a judge, you can't go anywhere else. You can't partner with a law firm, you can't partner with a company, like they can't go near you. But if it's an institution, everybody can go there. And if they're alums, they have something in common, right? So the research institutions in Brazil, which are an incredible resource relatively, anywhere in the world, they have to be doing projects that are pro bono, that are life-saving, but that aren't necessarily commercial. You can also spin off companies. And that's one of the things that helps pay for the other stuff. Steven Spielberg said he did Jaws so he can do Schindler's List. And so the commercial activity becomes a way of supporting the pro bono, the for good, purely for good activities too. Again, all that stuff is good. Now, I will say, even within elite law firms in Brazil, we're not there yet. And the reason is all the software that's coming in from the US doesn't work. It doesn't work on Brazilian Portuguese, and it doesn't work on the unique Brazilian Portuguese legal lexicon. The legal concepts are different. You've got code and now increasingly some degree of common law. The procedures are different. the lexicon that people need has not been created to dovetail, Google's generic NLP parser or even a legal AI company's stuff to do anything commercially. It doesn't work yet. So no, you'd be surprised. Like even at the elite level, it's very primitive. In the US and globally in investment banking, there's almost no intelligence about the legal artifacts people have. People review the contracts, sure, there's contract review technology. No one has any idea what the legal value being created in these companies is. They don't look at that. They can look at cash flow and maybe contracts. Everything else is a mystery to the most well-resourced, sophisticated people. It's a mess. So again, if you can throw startups into the very high-end stuff that is legitimate, there's legitimate clients, that's going to help fund the good works that you have to do for people that are, dying because they don't have access to healthcare. And I would suggest doing both. And I would much rather do, the war crimes prosecution stuff and everything else. You don't always have an opportunity to do that, but I think you can do both. And it's Mr. or Professor Reichelt, did I address your question at all, or it's a great question?
Sure. This is a tricky question, but thank you for all the insights you have put on. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else would like to ask something now?
I would have a question, but Carlos de Assis also raised his hand.
Okay, Professor Assis. Professor Walker, Professor Assis is also a colleague of mine from Mackenzie. He's going to ask you now. Professor Reichert is from PUC, Rio Grande do Sul. I think you have never been to Rio Grande do Sul, right? Porto Alegre?
Not yet. I'm hoping someday soon.
Next time we are going to arrange that.
So far, haven't come, but he'll be soon.
Yeah, that's
hope.
it. I don't know if you like meat, but in Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul beef is the best. We would say it's the best in the world. Yeah, it's the best in the world.
I don't have any partisan, carne associations. So, but I hear that definitely.
Okay, Professor Assis, please.
Thank you, Professor Walker, for your words. There's so many points that we have to think about this issue. I have one point that I was worried about. This point is this. Do you think, in case not involving fact-checking, the AI could be helpful giving just a draft of the solution for the judge? I mean, the AI furnishes a solution and the judge just check if everything is right and decides accordingly. But in such case, how could avoid confirmation bias?
Great. So I love that question. And by the way, before I get to it, because it's a deep topic, on the last questioner, I would also say, one of the things that we suggested in the past for AI projects at the national scale are, we're going to have explicit quantified goals of saving 200,000 lives and improving Brazilian economic productivity by 20%, which sounds ridiculously ambitious, but it's really not, right? There's at least 20% inefficiency. The American inefficiency in the legal system is probably like 80%. And we're fortunate in some ways. So we want to have very specific goals that force us to engage both the economic interest as well as the life and death interest for people. So again, I think quantifying that, binding people to the mast is really important. Otherwise, it gets lost. Opinion drafting, even most complaints are being drafted automatically in Brazil today. That is happening today. They may be bad or they may be good. I don't know because I'm not a Brazilian lawyer, but that is happening today. For a judge to do it, one, it will terrify people, right? So even if it could be perfect and perfectly unbiased, which is a fantasy, right? It's never, nothing is going to be perfectly unbiased. it would terrify people, and there would be the assumption that there would be bias. So Professor C's asked a great question. Here is another use case that I think is closer to reality and is something that is from a psychological standpoint, in terms of bias management and in terms of political acceptance and in terms of actual utility. How many cases are really similar based on their facts and their legal posture? What should constitute a constitutional case? And again, I don't think I'm revealing anything, but that is something that the AI could support and do and could be really helpful. So they're managing a cluster of cases. There's lots of dangers, so you have to have a bias checker even on that. Say, this case is not like this, because you have to have an advocate for the opposite. You have to have a confrontational system, even within that system to do clustering analysis that argues the exact opposite. And you can do that across 80 million cases, or every case that was filed anywhere in Brazil instantaneously. And what you do is you assume it's a very low confidence. Like, here is a guess. When we rolled out predictive modeling systems, or even, oh, sorry, was there another question? Or, no, okay. When we roll out something, we'd say, hey, this was in beta, or I would put a sign in certain things, even results that were pretty good. And I would say, these results are wrong. Do not trust these things. They are wrong. But I gave them a list of our best guess of what would be most relevant to them. And over time, the system improved. So that's a classic Silicon Valley approach, is you release something and you stamp it as wrong and you use it as an aid, and people tell you, and most of the time you can still do something really, really useful. I don't think you can build an opinion drafter that avoids that bias. I don't think there's any way to do that. I think you can automate a lot of the scrivening tasks and the document management tasks and the relationship, and say, hey, I want to look at every other case that's similar to this, factually, as well as from a doctrinal perspective, and do it instantaneously. That can happen really quickly. It can automate some of the clerk functions. I think part of opinion and drafting is sacred, and I know not every judge may feel that. They've got 8,000 active cases. They've got to decide. I mean, Anthony or Professor Delora, please help me out. But the number of cases that a judge at the SNJ was deciding per day is mind-boggling. And that intellectual function is the most complicated job I think it exists. Judicial decision-making, I think, is the most complicated thing anywhere. And it entails all of science, because if you're looking at a trade secret case where someone stole an agri-tech trade secret from one party to another, or you're dealing with environmental claims, or constitutional civil claims, there's an infinite amount of heterogeneity in the caseload. So analytically, it's the most complicated thing on earth to do, but they have very little analytical support. Unlike say the police have all kinds of tools they can use to look at stuff. And even some private nonprofits have all kinds of analytical tools that can say, hey, there are police abuses and here are the statistics on it. The judges, especially in other countries, they're very under-supported for that. So I don't think there's a way you can have an AI that can draft an opinion that can do that. I think you could have, the advocacy piece, you're much better positioned to kind of automate some of the supporting materials for those things. Here is one other use case that I think was really useful, and it's another case of failure where I think I've never had a chance to do it. But when I was at the War Crimes Tribunal, we were in the prosecutor's office, and we just had millions of pages of documents that we had to sort of summarize and then add witness interviews to it, and that would turn into evidence. And I built these maps. I drew these diagrams, and I was just a kid, probably younger than anyone on this call. And they're very helpful to people, because they'd say, hey, here's this relation to this event. This eyewitness account was here and at this time, and you'd get a map of what happened in relation to the individuals and the parties. And I was talking to a judge in a manner that was not about any case at all, but I described what my job was. And she said, I'd love to have stuff like that. and this was her name was Nivanethan Pillay. She was a South African judge, became very famous later on at the UN, and creating these judicial maps of what's happening. I think that like a Google map of the legal territory and the factual territory and the pain, you know, the evidence of the suffering or the claimants, what they're going through, that I think could be profoundly supportive. The writing that stuff, I think is A, sacred, and B, even if you could make it unbiased and you couldn't, I think it would make people doubt the entire system. So even the appearance of bias in this case would be, it's like the appearance of unethical conduct. You can't even do something that appears to be unethical, even if it's ethical. The great example I have of this misuse of AI is in the UK when COVID hit, and then I'll be quiet for a second. When COVID hit, none of the students could take their national exams, and they didn't have a way of doing it remotely monitored or any of that. So what they did is they said, you're in this school, they may or may not know your grades, but you're in this school, so you're going to do about this well. Well, if you're in an elite private academy, guess what? Your life is pretty good. You're going to get a score great, and you don't have to do any work at all. And if you're in a terrible public or private school, and it not terrible in the sense that maybe the grades aren't as good, you're trapped. Like, that is the worst possible thing in a democracy to me. It's like, we're going to trap you because we have this stereotype called mathematics. It's going to trap you at this score in your final exam. And of course, it blew up. It just blew up in their face. So I think the judicial opinion issue is 10 times worse. The supporting data can not only make you more efficient, but it can make you more intelligent about what's happening. And civil procedure is the most important example for me of the use of AI, because you can teach not only the rules and not only cases, you can say, of 80 million active pending cases, 20% have used this procedure, and others, you know, or you could look at, these are the banking cases, right? And these are the civil rights cases, and these are the constitutional cases. You can ask questions and say, we know exactly how many people have done what and what the outcomes were. And because of that, you know, court, in your administrative or in your legal function, you should tweak the system so it's adjusted. Damages awards, right? Damages awards for the claims we were talking about in the US, they were like this. They had no relation to anything rational at all, and then the courts saw this. The White House was going to do something. The Senate was going to do something. And before they could do that, the appellate court said, we're not going to let these other branches deal with our problem. They created standards for damages for these certain types of cases. And it created kind of an equilibrium for things. Again, judges can vary from the standards, but they have to show why the case is different. So I think it can make judges more intelligent and more functional and manage that massive. I think it can make the statutes more intelligent, the way we design it from every perspective, but I don't think it should write opinions. Anyway, maybe I'm too old school.
I think Hannah would like to ask, and I also see Ricardo later. Hannah, are you there? Would you like to ask a question? Okay.
Yeah, actually, my question was about the quantitative analysis to guarantee the access to justice. I was thinking about if it maybe has something to do with the economic analysis to check the viability of some certain litigation. So do you think certain AI can maybe see the economic analysis, if it helps to see if it's possible, the chance of success maybe of this certain litigation? So that would be kind of my question.
Yeah, do you mean like Moneyball, or to do predictive modeling of the outcome?
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, 100% game theory, and not just in litigation, but in contractual and M&A contexts.
Yeah.
So when I was a young lawyer in, it helps not to know anything sometimes, but when I was a young lawyer in Palo Alto, after the first tech crash in 2001, an unwise partner let me talk to the client in an M&A deal. And this European company was buying this small software company in Palo Alto. And they have these things called change of control provisions in the M&A agreement. And it says, if a big company buys you, or if any company buys you, it's a change of control, this inbound software license is void. It doesn't work anymore. And so you got to get a new license. It's a change of control provision. And they had a situation where it was going to prevent them. They didn't have this license, their software wasn't going to work. So, which means the company wouldn't have been valuable, or it had to do a workaround. So I said, and the business guy goes to me, what's my risk? Being an unwise first-year corporate associate, I said, here's the formula for your risk. Because I had just come from the University of Chicago and I had been brainwashed by amazing, lovely people, and hopefully in a good way, in a skeptical way. But I said, gee, it'd be nice if I could populate this formula with some data. And Lex Machina was that for these kind of narrow tech things. You can do that for everything. And in fact, there's an entire industry in the US that is kind of does predictive modeling of these cases. Doesn't always work. It's like it's like civil procedure or anything that you're doing. There's an art to it that involves, good data, first of all, but also good legal analysis. And in particular, to take an economic reference to sort of long-term capital management. Long-term capital management was like how 4 Nobel Prize winning economists can lose like $1 trillion overnight. Like, that's the story. It was a very successful kind of hedge fund quantitative play, and something weird happened, and then it blew apart spectacularly. And at the end, Milton Friedman or some other guy says, a famous economist says, you do this analysis, but at the end of the day, you want to know that, hey, something is different. Something's changed. There's a black swan event. There's a pandemic. Mm-hmm. There's a war in the Ukraine, and God willing, that will end soon. You have to know when something is off, and your normal game theory or your normal predictive modeling exercise is not going to work. The way I like to start is with a lot of humility. I say, here is the history. 99 times out of 100 cases of this type in front of this judge or any other judge like her, they decided this. And you may have a different one, but here's the history. You can't go wrong by giving the history of something, mm-hmm. even if your argument is we're going to do better than the mean. And the judges do that too. So we had a magistrate judge in SF. He said, I love this, because when the lawyer on one side says, Judge, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to invalidate these claims and they won't exist. And I'm like, and he can go, how many times have you done that in your 10 years of practice? And he can see, I see that the answer is 0. You've done this 0 times. You better settle, right? So not everything, it's an n-dimensional mirror. So the other sides can do that, and the judges can do that too. And the magistrates who want to push people to resolution can do that. You have to do it with humility, I would say. Otherwise, things tend to blow up, even if it works for a bunch of times too. Did that address your question, Ms. Elf?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And by the way,
okay.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, please.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Now that people are doing these things, and they're using AI to look at procedural events across Brazil and states, you have to, one has to, your students can do research on things using these types of tools, and there should be public ones too, and certainly for the academies, they can do research on okay, this is the procedure, and this is the intent behind it, and this is how the history of how it got developed and amended. What are people actually doing, and what's the outcome? How good is this procedure? Can we tweak it? Should this procedure be moved up or back? There's an entirely new dimension of questions we can ask, and you can do economic metric modeling, not just from an individual plaintiff's perspective, but from the system perspective. Is our system as efficient as Singapore's, or is it more efficient than Belgium's? I don't know. You can start to address this, certainly within states, right? And the states will compete with each other. Judges, they're collegial, but they will want to, have better X, Y, Z than other judges, and certainly the lawyers will. You can look at it from a system perspective, and the most important thing there is from the economic perspective of an individual citizen, and I mean resident as well when I say citizen as a defined term. From the perspective of the individual citizen, how good is the procedural network? Not just from the judges, not just from the litigants, but from a citizen's perspective. tax dollars, all the inputs from this system. It's very complicated. How good is her well-being? You know, and can you rate that subjectively, or even using objective things like access to secondary education, access to advanced education, access to healthcare, like, or how much time did she have to spend on her divorce case, or on her healthcare case, or social security case? How much time does it take for each person? And gosh, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And you can look at this from every perspective. It gets complicated, but the big economic players and the individual citizens, and you can avoid some bias by a multiplicity of approaches to that. Professor Delora, back to you.
Okay. Now it's a question from Ricardo Dalmaso Max. I don't know if you have already met him. He's a great lawyer regarding tech and law here in Brazil. So I would like to hear he's going to ask. I'm keen on that. Ricardo, please go ahead.
That's very kind of you, Professor. You probably don't remember me, Delotti, but you were my professor at law school.
I do.
Actually,
I do.
So actually,
Yes.
Professor Delotti was my professor at law school, and Professor Joshua Walker, I think we met in the past. So it's great to see you again.
I remember you, Ricardo. Remember.
So it's great to be here. So thank you for an invitation, and thank you, Professor Walker. This was super interesting. My question is related to what you were saying about the use cases and which use cases are feasible today, the ones that are not. And my main question is, what are the differences that you see in terms of regulation between the private platforms and the public sphere? Because I think it was really interesting that you mentioned how you see that playing out in courts. But there's as you also said, there's a lot that private platforms are already doing in the use of AI in their own procedures. And how do you think the regulation should be different in terms of the use of AI, how transparent this use of AI should be? Or do you think it's all the same? Because I thought it was really interesting what you said. And there are some other scholars in Brazil that I think they're very conscious, and they're saying something similar. They're saying we should not be thinking necessarily about any AI being used to draft an opinion. Maybe we should think about how to make sure we understand the cases that are being submitted to the courts and everything else. But we know there are some. I'll give you an example. Like, you know, if others have heard here about Clarus. Like they are proposing at least the use of AI a little bit beyond that. Would be curious to know what you think about the differences between the regulation for private and for public platforms.
Yeah, and Clarus, could you tell me what they do exactly, or what they're
Absolutely. Actually, they design a process that they don't call it arbitration, but it's based on blockchain. But basically, what they do is that you can select jurors. They don't say arbitrators for all across the globe, and they use game theory to incentivize those jurors to vote according to the law, or not necessarily the law, I think, according to what they think it's right. But it's a totally new process that they are saying for the specific market where they operate, which is the market of freelancers and online services. The design is more suited for them as citizens. And they are claiming to say, okay, AI is and blockchain are going to solve more problems than the courts. And then it comes, I think what you mentioned a little bit earlier is like, we're seeing a privatization, right, of justice. And some scholars see that as a concern. So should be the regulation more, I don't know, more liberal, more flexible for those platforms in comparison to the courts? I think that's my main question for you. And I'm sorry for the
no problem. We just resolve on the best form of government, and that'll tell us, what to answer your question.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, another 30 seconds or so. If you reveal something really important, if you do nothing, if nothing happens, the private, and it's not even the private sector, this is the libertarian blockchain ecosystem is going to do stuff that's like way over here. And the government will self-regulate itself to do nothing or to have very slow processes because we're chasing perfect unbiasedness, right? Or additional, so many controls over the use of AI in government that it's going to kill off a lot of innovation. So the people that can solve this, and this is why from the beginning of your statement, how do we get from super interesting to super useful? And I want this to be super useful. The projects that you do, each of you, and I don't know how many, the total numbers on this, but that each of you are doing that can be aided by some of these types of things, they are the things that are going to have to bridge the gap to use the finest and best commercial software or open source software. And often those are the same things, which is extraordinary, right? Open source can often be better than the classically designed, hierarchically designed commercial software, but it can be better and more open, obviously. We can't ignore those capabilities because not only will ecosystems develop on their own and develop their own issues, right, with this, but they will also, you will also get an arms race at which the governments and the judges are, and any citizen, generic citizen who's not represented by a big class action law firm is going to be severely, severely underarmed. If certain law firms are drafting all of their documents using an automated process, their costs for filing lawsuits are going to go way down. And they're going to know when to file and what to file, because the question that Ms. Alf asked, they're doing the predictive modeling exercise to some extent. The government needs software that is at least as good as an average private law firm in Brazil. And so and it should be a lot better, and it should cover a lot more things, and should be able to work with proprietary government data as well as public information. The real challenge that I see in regulation of AI, of government use of AI, is bias is there no matter what. Humans are biased. We're all biased, every single one of us. And the best thing we can do is recognize that. And if you recognize, I'm a biased person, I'm going to start counteracting my natural bias using these tricks and to short circuit my innate rage and imperfection, right? That's what we can do. And the software can remind it. We know that you're going to be biased, so just double check. You're not just hiring people from your fraternity, or if you are, that you're hiring other people too, right? And so the danger, to go back a little bit to answer the question, what is AI? I would argue that AI is just automated analysis. That's all it is. It's not anything particularly special. It's automated analysis. It's new, right? But it's just automated analysis. If you are massively regulating automated analysis, but you're not regulating at all the same analysis that is being done if there's like 99% automated and then one human signs off on it, right? Like the opinion that the professor asked before, that's automatically written, been signed by a human, so it's not automated analysis. To me, that's not better than completely automated, maybe worse. And humans by themselves are going to be naturally biased. So the real question is, how do you build a system that gets the best of both worlds, that cross-tests for bias, but also gives individual agency and creativity to the human, that has common sense, which the AI does not? You have to build the best AI in the government sector, not the worst. And doing that means accepting imperfection and doing pilots, right? And you can't do that if it's life and death. You've got to, the academies are the place to start, I think. So huge question. By the way, I love the juror thing. It's also being used in the People's Republic of China very successfully. And they're just random users that like to try cases. They like to be jurors. And that's wonderful. And I think we could use that. It's like the Gakaka system in Central Africa. People, there's like village, arbitrators kind of thing. Yeah, a few more questions as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Well, I'd love to keep talking about that, by the way, and great to see you again. Thanks.
Professor Walker, first of all, what's your deadline? I don't know until what time we can go. We have for now 2 more questions. Do you think it's been already over what we have thought at first? So I have to ask you if we can have 2 or 3 more questions, or it's not possible. Please feel free, of course, to
Yes,
say
let's take, if you can give me 30 seconds, I just have to make sure my son is all right.
Okay,
don't
don't
give
worry.
me 30 seconds. I'll be right back if that's okay.
Okay. If you need to finish now, don't worry. We can
No,
schedule
just
for
give me
another
30
day.
seconds. I'll be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delore, I'm raising my hand here. I'm the third one.
Okay, where is your hand, my man?
Here it is, 2 hands.
Então, Fernanda, Leonardo, Jordão. Aí acho que a gente pode encerrar por aí, né, pessoal?
Sim. Acho que é o prudente.
Perfeito, né? Se tem o filho, né? A gente não tinha, né, Anthony? A gente tinha falado mais ou menos entre 30 a 40 minutos, o que dá 110,
Isso.
né? Eu não sou ruim de matemática, mas não é isso. A gente já estourou esse limite. Mas as perguntas estão muito boas, acho que o papo está fluindo, então, né, se ele se colocou à disposição, a gente faz isso.
And you can't leave Brazilian people alone for 1 minute that they start speaking Portuguese.
I hope not. I hope not. That's the point. So, and by the way, same thing with the AIs. It's got to speak Portuguese. It's got to speak Portuguese law, not just Brazilian Portuguese. And it don't yet. Like other than things that are developed in Brazil, the stuff that's off the shelf, it really, you need to create, and it's really a legal task more than anything else, the lexicon that's going to provide the national infrastructure for every type of usage, commercial, civil, from every sector of society and the citizenship. So, but yeah, speak Brazilian, speak Portuguese, of course.
In a few years, you're going to speak with us, I'm quite sure. You know already all the accents from Boa Noite, so that's amazing.
God willing, yeah. I don't know what the different accents mean though, so that's, I'm completely ignorant, and I, have no partisan or regional affiliation. So, anyway.
No worries. Now it's going to be a question from Professora Fernanda Tartucci, which is from CEAPRO. It's a Civil Procedure Study Center, a think tank with professors from all over Brazil. And Professor Fernanda Tartucci is one of the main authors regarding mediation. So I think she's going to ask something about AI and mediation. Just guessing. Let's see.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Delore. It's great to have you here, Professor. I'd like to ask you about AI in mediation, because in many situations, people want to express themselves, feel that they have their day in court, and many times the system is not worried about having this space. So how about the potential lack of flexibility about other proposals? How do you see these situations?
So I don't know how much I can talk about this, but I'm aware that in Rio, the number of lawsuits and disputes around electrical bills is enormous. And typically those disputes are fairly standardized, and they are potentially ripe for automation in a mediation sense. Not that you can't appeal to a human judge, but if you reduce the cost in time and pain, and let's say it's 10,000 reals, or let's say it's 3,000 reals, like people may have an incentive to a greater incentive to come to terms if it's not, a life and death million real case or something like that, right? So I think there are bands of cases that are particularly opportune for automation and putting into mediation. And it's not to say that there aren't incredibly complicated cases that could come out of it that require human review, but I think, to me, that's the low-hanging fruit, is you go after, if you just focused on the electric civil and corporate disputes between the payers and the payees, I think there's a very significant amount of utility that can be brought, not just to citizens, but to the country as a whole, right? And that's my guess. And you could design it well. Now, online mediation systems, which are not necessarily automated, right? A lot of these are using, like, use customers, like, to resolve disputes of other customers. Like, it's a wild idea that seems to work in some case. and you pay them with certificates and status and things. It's really, I think it's really failed in a lot of even sort of like eBay disputes and things like that. You know, online purchases, right, is a classic case. We haven't nailed that yet. So I think architecting the right system that isn't arrogant from a human perspective, judge making, and isn't arrogant from an AI perspective is really hard. So can you be the artist that makes mediation work in Brazil in ways it has never done before? Absolutely. And you have to use the best of the legal acumen as well as the other thing. When I was taking contracts 100 years ago or so, you know, my teacher, she was a very controversial teacher, but very interesting, spoke her mind. And her father was a mediator. And she said he never did very well because he would always decide what he thought the law was. And the mediator that people wanted, because of the selection mechanisms, was always who does 50-50. They want someone who splits the baby because that's, they're the least like, they're people are risk averse. Least. How do you manage that issue? And how do you manage the issue of having, quote, a hanging judge, you know, someone who always argues or has a certain bias, right? It's very difficult. You may be able to do it for certain bands of cases by really automating it and using customers to, you know, cross-check things. But architecting the right mediation system, I think it's the most likely way to resolve a very material amount of cases that otherwise will go to court in the next 6 months to 6 years. I mean, that finding the right band, whether it's the type of claim, whether it's one municipality, it could be, again, it could be Amazonia, it could be Porto Alegre, it doesn't matter. But if you focus on one and build a beautiful system, it's gonna expand. Both people like replicating, they're trying to replicate that, and also literally using the software. And if you open source it, governments would be much more open to using it, right? Because if it's a proprietary software company, they're going to be suspicious. But also they can see the code. It's open. There's less suspicion and fear of things that are simpler and more transparent. So I think if you do the right example, that has the greatest potential to use this to reduce the caseload and hopefully in a just way. But doing it well, it's like you're designing a country, right? And you have all the complexity that a judge has when she's dealing with the most complex procedural and other things. It doesn't matter that it's worth, it could be a 5 real case. You're still going to have the complexity. The reason that mediation, I think, can have greater opportunities that the facts can also be more available as well. So not just again, as with the blockchain ideal, I'm not saying it's always the reality, but the ideal is everything that has happened is manifest. You know all the facts. A computer can read the facts. And so everything else can just be automated. They just have to pay, or the payment got messed up. But the thing that was supposed to happen, the other side did it, right? You can prove that and you know it. If you can create a system that has the factual information as well as a well-designed, beautifully architected, and architecture is the right word, mediation system, I think you can make a huge dent in justly resolving, at least somewhat justly resolving a significant amount of dispute. But it's great. The devil's in the details, like doing that in real life, that's the fun part. And that's what I love talking about.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Walker, once again, I'm worried. 2 more questions, 1 more question, or no more questions. Feel free to say.
Bring them on.
Okay. Now it's going to be.
I have an automated babysitter called a video game.
Let's try that. Okay. Now it's going to be Leonardo Dibi, which is a grad student, a brilliant grad student, I have to say, from IBMEC College here from São Paulo. Leonardo, go ahead, man.
Hi, Professor Walker. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to meet you. My question is, like, thinking about artificial reality, it seems so distant from Brazil. We know that Brazil has some problem with economics, and we understand that artificial reality is like a dream that we only see in movies. And when we bring to the artificial reality for law, I think we have like some examples in law firms, but they are more private because we need to invest a lot of money in that to have this opportunity here. My question is, in your point of view, when we will be able to see artificial reality in our procedures, in like the justice procedures, and in this moment, what you understand that is the lawyer aspect, like what the lawyer will do in this moment.
What client are we trying to help in this use case, and how?
I'll say every client. Like if we think like the artificial reality or artificial intelligence, it's used in law. What we're going to do if they use artificial reality, like in the future, in the long future.
Yeah, I think it may seem distant, but if you think about it, all of us use AI every day, and it's a Google search, it's a social networking, it's a thing when if we're purchasing something anywhere, even in a store, they have their own AI things that are going to automate logistics and the inventory replenishment for the most part. Not everybody, right? But a lot of them. And increasingly, even if you're a small grocery store in a region, you can still get cheap AI tools to help you plan resources and inventory and things like that. You can actually still do that. And that's something that's changed right now. The marginal cost is zero. So having again, it's not all there yet at all, and not everybody is taking advantage of some of these tools, but the potential to use all of it is certainly there. For me as a citizen, I want to know which law firm to hire. Do I have a good chance in my case? Should I be filing a case? What is my legal situation? Like, what's my legal reality? So you use the word artificial reality. At first, I thought you were talking about augmented reality or virtual reality, but I want to know my legal reality. So AI taking all the documents associated with me and turning that into a state, that's what I want to know. What's my situation as a citizen? If you can do something that can take raw text and give someone a map of what they are and what decisions they could or could not make in their life, the legal reality, I think that'd be fantastic. When I was a first-year law student, I remember flying over south of the United States, over Texas, and we learned about riparian rights, river access to water rights, right, which are obviously huge everywhere, as controversial in Brazil as anywhere else. And there were farms, and I said, now that I've taken a property class, I can see the world in a way that I've never been able to see. And using software automation, extracting information, and customization automatically, you can give that gift to anybody, understanding their legal reality. And if their lawyer is doing something bad, is that, are they messing with their trust fund things? Getting an alert, right? Automatically telling us, hey, there's something we need to double check here, or your lawyer shouldn't have done X, Y, Z. For the judges, is a lawyer being unethical? Is she or he engaged in a practice that is they say that it's X, but really they're lying, or they've done this like very expensive motion 500 times. They've never won. They're clearly doing it not because they think it's meritorious, but to just impose costs on the other side. You can see the world as a judge. You can see the world in a way you've never been able to see before. For lawyers, what's likely to win, and how much is a case going to cost? And if I have to guess how much the budget's going to be, I can tell them. So I think for all of us, but particularly for citizens, it's to be able to see the legal world. It's like seeing the spirit world. Like you can see it for the first time. So I think that's to be able to see is the most important thing. Once you see what's going on, it's relatively straightforward to fix things or to make better decisions, whether you're a judge or a citizen or the president, right? If you see the legal reality and it's not just people arguing about ghosts in the dark, right? You can see what's happening. I think that's the most important function.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Leonardo. And for finally, our final question, Professor Jordão Violim. Professor Jordão is from PUC Curitiba, another of the sponsors of tonight's event. And probably you have never been to Curitiba also, Professor Walker, so next time.
Not yet.
Okay,
Just
great.
time.
So next time, São Paulo, Curitiba, Porto Alegre, and also Campinas, which are the cities from our college here. Professor Jordão.
Thank you so much, Professor Delotti. Thank you so much, Professor Walker, for being with us tonight. I have one question for you. It's related to something you said in the first part during your lecture, and it's related to maybe to a difficulty of mine. You know, I'm this guy who cannot find the button on the screen to raise my hand. So I can see how we can use AI to identify decision patterns and anticipate judicial doctrines, for example. But I may have a hard time imagining how we can use AI to screen documents and overcome for example, the document dump strategy. So how can we develop a system? How can we design a system so we can reduce the costs of discovery and avoid this strategy?
And so reduce the cost of discovery specifically or generally, which is other questions as well, as an example?
The other question was just an example, so you can concentrate.
That's great. So I'm the guy who took too long to get onto the Zoom call. So I have no special magic either in mathematics or computer science. What I do know is that I don't know it, and you know, I think that's a huge gift. When I was an undergraduate, I had created a major called conflict studies, and my advisor, who was an amazing, generous man, he dedicated his life to making peace between two warring groups in a very difficult part of the world. And I asked him, because I had done this interdisciplinary major, I said, aren't people that are doing interdisciplinary things, aren't they at risk of being a Jack or a Jane of all trades? And he goes, it's like a quilt. So in the US, we used to make quilts, and every square sometimes would be very intricately designed, and then that you knit them all together. And maybe one person would do one square, and then a different family would do another square, and you put them all together. He said, some people work on the individual patches of the quilt, and other people knit them together. You don't have to be the best computer scientist in the world. You don't even have to learn how to program or do R. Just be the best at whatever you are. And frankly, for a lot of us, for me, it's trying to read and write well and analyze, hopefully, but really reading and writing. And that's super hard, right? Even in one language, not to mention many others and many dialects. I have to be able to connect with other folks. And so you can be a person that knits things together. You can be a person that only reviews like individual documents. The benefit of the AI is that for me, when I was reviewing cases and making very, very fine-tuned decisions about what was a procedural event X and what was a procedural event Y, and asking the top academics in the world, hey, what did you think of this? And sometimes judicial clerks, like, do you agree with this summary of this case? And they'd tell me, like, no, you were an idiot, like, do this. So you can have very, very fine-tuned engagement in the quilt or whatever you're doing, whether it's discovery process or whether it's mediation, arbitration during the case or private mediation. You need to be able to connect with mathematics somehow. And I think that's the real message. and the mathematicians can't be arrogant jerks, or engineers can be arrogant engineers that say, it's just data. It is not. Law is a really specific type of thing. It's not just a bunch of data. It's human life and rights in a way that it's a castle, it's a cathedral, I think. But there's data about these things. We can't define justice quantitatively, but we can say how long a case took, and we need to know that to begin to understand the system of justice and the system for resolution of disputes. So you have to be able to connect to those people. Again, universities, research institutions are the best places in the world to do it. Startups are also great because people are thrown in this pressure cooker. We need to replicate that for nonprofit projects as well. So I think do what you do and just find a way to connect and create these interdisciplinary projects. And ideally, in universities are the best place, in my view, Professor. Did I address your question? Or?
Yes, it did. That was an amazing answer, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Well, Professor Walker, more than we have thought. Thank you for your time. I think I hope this is the first of lots of things that we could do together. And of course, we hope that you can be soon, very soon, here in person with us. I don't know which city, but let's make it happen. So
all
that's my wish. Okay, great, awesome, even better.
Just Professor Valério, if I may, this needs to be a Brazilian tour.
Okay,
awesome. He has plenty of cities to visit.
Okay,
São Paulo, Porto Alegre, Curitiba, Ribeirão Preto. I have seen a professor from Ribeirão Preto in here as well. Many cities, Joshua. Brace yourself for visiting many cities during the next visit to Brazil.
Knowing nothing and no accents and no political parties an advantage sometimes. But again, we can share the mistakes that we've made in the US that we're making now and help you get beyond them. And that's the real advantage. As Ricardo, Mr. Marquez had said, I hope to get from super interesting to super useful. And that is the projects that every single one of you are doing. There is no one else in Brazil that's better positioned to actually help people and leverage these tools than you guys. And thank you for putting up with this long talk and engagement. It's lovely speaking with all of you.
To wrap up, can I ask a picture? Those who can open your cameras. Okay, Ricardo, your hair is great, don't worry. So those who are here and can open their camera, please just wrap up with a good camera to go online. Of course, we are talking about AI, we are talking about virtual reality, AI, and we have to finish with a photo, okay? People opening.
If I may,
okay,
you should ask for everybody to take pictures. Because I'm sure there won't be a space for room for everybody in one picture.
Okay,
we have to take a lot of pictures from different people here. That's my suggestion.
That's how we do AI projects too, by the way. It's
yeah.
It's a myriad, as they say in the Bible. By the way, this book is out there. If it's useful, it's a bunch of stories. So again, if it's in Brazilian Portuguese, thankfully.
It's already on the chat, Professor Walker, with the link to Amazon, which is the best price today. So we have already put it on the chat. Don't worry. Okay, one more picture. Come on for a minute. Okay, that's it. Okay, we got it. Great. Professor Walker, thank you very much for your time, for your knowledge, for being so kind to us. That was great.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.